Amy, thank you very much. Thank you all for being here. This is an opportunity for us to dig beneath the surface of an important issue. How do we make progress on climate change? And look in particular at the extraordinary amount of innovation that's going on at the state or provincial, local, city levels. So we've got two groups of leaders in that regard ready to share with you their experience. And let me bring to the stage now Governor Peter Shumlin of Vermont and Premier Philippe Couillard of Quebec. So I just want to start this panel by saying that I think one of the spirits of the week here in New York, as we think about how to take our climate change action agenda to the next level, gearing up for what we hope will be a new round of commitments in Paris in December of 2015. In that spirit, one of the real areas of activity is thinking about how we go beyond the existing dialogue that's nation state to nation state. And in that regard, we do have two of the leaders who've been doing great things at the subnational jurisdiction, and that really is the focus of our topic today. So let me start with Governor Shumlin. You are leading a state that has moved dramatically towards a clean energy future. How have you done that, and what do you see happening at the state level that might translate to the national dialogue in the United States?
Well, first of all, I'm honored to be here. Thanks so much for including me. And I'm honored to be here with my friend, Premier Couillard. Quebec is Vermont's biggest trading partner, so we're joined at the hip, and we're in climate change together. We also share a lake that feeds into the Richelieu River, so when my lake floods, the Premier floods. Let me just start answering a question, Dan, by saying this. When I ran for governor, I had a 5-way Democratic primary when I originally ran 4 years ago, and then a general election. We have a very town meeting representative form of government in Vermont, and we had about 72 debates in that election. That's how we do it, 72. And I had all kinds of questions asked of me and the other candidates, and I never once did someone stand up and say, hey, of all you candidates, who's going to be the best climate change storm manager for Vermont? Never had the question. And since that time, I was lucky enough to be elected, I've managed now 4 climate change-induced storms. They have varied in severity. They have turned little teeny streams into raging rivers that have swept away 7 Vermonters. We've lost over 500 miles of roads, 36 bridges in one storm, lost endless homes, covered bridges that have been there for hundreds of years, businesses, you name it, tremendous tragedy. That's just one of the storms that I dealt with. So I think the answer, Dan, to your question is, unfortunately, because of the climate denial in Congress and in Washington, I think the only hope is governors and premiers and mayors working together to actually make things happen. We're out of time. We see it on the ground every single day because of, we now get 12 inches of rain in Vermont in a storm where we used to get, as a kid growing up there, 1 inch or 2. So we're in this together. So what are we doing? We've set a very clear goal of a 90% renewable energy portfolio by 2050, and we're marching towards that goal with extraordinary speed. How? Since I've been governor, we have built out renewables. We've quadrupled the number of solar panels in one of the least sunny states in America. We have a very aggressive energy efficiency utility that's reducing our electric demand and conserving power across Vermont. We're building out wind. We're harnessing the sun. We're putting in heat pumps. We're doing everything we know how to meet that goal. So I would say that right now, the states, the provinces, the cities are our hope in a nation where climate change deniers slow progress in DC.
So let me ask you, Premier, the same question. You have been a leader on this issue as well, and in Canada there is particular jurisdiction given to the provinces in terms of energy policy. Can you give us a picture of what's happening in Quebec and how you think it might represent a model, perhaps more broadly for Canada or for others beyond Canadian borders?
I think it speaks of the importance of subnational states and large cities, because most of the jurisdictions that are needed both to front the cost associated with climate change, be it healthcare, dealing with coastal erosion, for example, are under our level of competency, as well as tools we need to fight efficiently climate change, natural resources, energy, grids, regulation, touching those two sectors. So I think the subnational level, for reasons you mentioned in your introduction, is the best suited to address the situation in practical terms. There's the theoretical discourse about climate change that we all hear, we have to save the planet. Everybody wants to save the planet. But when it comes to actual concrete action, I think this is where it will start. And it has to be brought from bottom up instead of from top to bottom.
Let me push you a little bit more, Premier, if I can. Quebec's also made something of an economic opportunity out of clean energy and the need to address climate change. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
First, when I think about climate change, I put it in the economic growth column of what I want to do as a leader of our government. I don't put it in the expense side or the difficult file side. I put it as an opportunity. By introducing this joint carbon market with California, we're going actually to get financial resources that we're going to use to develop the new, greener, low-carbon economy that everybody's talking about. And for this, I think we have chosen the best tool, which is, in fact, what this whole week is about, is to put a price on carbon. And I think most people agree that it has to be done in some way, whether it's a carbon tax or a carbon trading system, a price has to be attached to carbon.
So actually, it's interesting, both the Premier and the Governor are in control of jurisdictions where there is a price on carbon. You have joined with California in the Western Climate Initiative and the cap and trade program there. Governor Shumlin, you've been part of the New England Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. Is there a risk that those who step up, as you have, are going to face an economic disadvantage, a competitive disadvantage, because you're putting a price on carbon while others are not?
Well, first of all, I really admire Premier Couillard's leadership. And as you know, New England, or the Northeast, has a RGGI agreement. It's basically a carbon auction. We have 11 states participating. We had 12. New Jersey dropped out under Governor Christie. He dropped out before he slowed down the traffic on the bridge, not after. And it's making a difference. But there's no doubt that working regionally, we can make extraordinary progress. And I think RGGI is a great example. We've literally pumped $2 billion of renewables and energy efficiency into the states that are a part of the RGGI movement.
And in fact, there was a study that came out last year that showed that investment in efficiency has actually reduced the cost of doing business across New England and those northeastern states.
No question about it. And if you just take Vermont's economy, and I totally agree with the Premier's comments, we leaders, mayors, governors, premiers, have to see the opportunity of moving from our addiction to oil to other ways of powering the future as an economic opportunity for jobs and job creation. And I've seen it in Vermont. I have one of the lowest unemployment rates in America now. We have, in the first quarter of 2014, we actually were one of the 2 states that actually saw income growth in this country. And it isn't coincident. We now, this year, for the first time, have more solar green jobs than any other state in the country. So the point is, when you make the bold initiatives to move from fossil fuels to other ways of powering the future and do energy efficiency, which are jobs that can't be exported to India and China, you grow jobs, you grow economic opportunity, you raise incomes, and you have a more livable planet. And I continue to say that if the folks in Washington could get this one at a time when the middle class has seen almost no gains from the economic recovery, the lower income Americans have actually seen a loss of income from the depths of the recession. If those folks in DC and Congress would invest in renewables and energy efficiency, the middle class would see their incomes go up. We'd see much more robust job creation. I believe that transition from fossil fuel to other ways of powering the future can make the industrial revolution and the tech boom look small. So we just got to get it done.
Premier, could you give us some similar thoughts on whether you see a burden from putting a price on carbon? Because that will be one of the critical questions under debate here this week.
I see it as an advantage. I see it as an advantage. Of course, we are blessed by our geography. We have 2 to 3% of the world's freshwater reserves, which is fantastic. We have vast hydropower. 98% of our energy is provided through renewable sources. So we have this situation that allows us to do this. But a lot of attention is always put on how much it would cost to fight climate change, and not enough attention is given to how much it costs not to fight climate change. As a leader of a government that is responsible for healthcare, I can tell you that 43% of our budget is dedicated to healthcare. We also have to take care of infrastructure, and we have coastal areas in Quebec, of course, are touched by coastal erosion. We spend collectively $14 billion a year to import fossil fuels. So all this is a net cost for us. Of course, there will be a transition period. It's not going to happen overnight. This movement towards a low-carbon economy is not going to happen immediately. It may happen stepwise. And this is always what I like to say to our friends of the environment groups, NGOs, that we will not get rid of fossil fuels overnight, but we have to start the journey now. Journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, as we say. And only making the transition from bunker fuel or diesel towards natural gas is a gain, but it's not going to stop there, because meanwhile, we have hydropower, we have solar, we have wind, and we can prepare this century and the next century's energy sources. But again, I must recognize that we are blessed in Quebec by this fantastic geography, and I can speak of no other better place to face this challenge that we are all facing today.
Well, you've made two critical points that I think are, again, ones that I hope everyone takes home this week. First is that the cost of the transition need not be hugely burdensome. So the cost of change can be modest or even positive in some circumstances. And second, there is a huge cost to inaction. So the choice really isn't, do we bear the cost of change or zero? It's, do we bear the cost of change or of no change?
Absolutely.
And I think that is really a critical point.
And when we made the decision, of course, the first critical decision was to believe in climate change, as we all know. The second decision was to recognize that the human production of carbon is strongly associated with the phenomenon. And then, of course, you get to price carbon. And then you have a choice between the carbon tax and the carbon market. The reason we chose the carbon market is that it has the advantage of putting the responsibility on the shoulders of emitters. They have to take the decision. Will I pay credits all the time, or will I innovate and change the way I run my business? So it fosters innovation, which itself, in today's world, is a factor of economic growth. You see, our population is 8 million. It's not going to grow that much in the coming years. So we have two obligations. One is to innovate, and second, to export.
So let me ask the governor a similar question. I think innovation turns out to be critical to the success going forward. And one of the lessons that I've drawn from time working with you and others in government is that innovation is not just technology development, but it's innovation in policy, in incentives, in how we engage the public, in the process by which we push clean energy forward. What do you see happening in Vermont that speaks to this need for a broader picture of innovation?
Well, first of all, it's about partnerships. That's really important. You know, government can't go this alone. We're in a private-public partnership on climate change with all the partners. And one of the unique thing about Vermont, I call it what I hope will be is the small rural state that shows other rural states how to get this right. But we've got our utilities, we've got our businesses, we've got our public sector partnering together to get this done. And let me just give you an example. My biggest utility, which powers 80% of Vermont, is in partnership with us, moving to a new business model, where they move from the notion of huge generators out there somewhere to locally generated power within communities and within neighborhoods. And that's literally their business model. They will go into a home now and take an old Vermont home, insulate the heck out of it, pull out the windows and doors, replace them, blow it with cellulose or whatever they can get in, put in a heat pump, put a solar panel on the roof, and through those measures with efficiency, make that home a net zero home. That's their business model. You call us and we will come in and do that for you. So it's that kind of partnership that's so critical. I think the second piece, and Premier Couillard just mentioned this, is grassroots up is how this is going to happen. We have 100 energy committees popping up in communities throughout Vermont. It's just local citizens who are coming together in the town form of volunteer government saying, we're going to compete with the other communities to see who can move to zero net energy renewable power fastest. And they're having competitions, and they're beating each other, and they're taking it seriously. And it's got hundreds and hundreds of Vermonters, and they all get together and compare notes, figure out what's working and what's not. So I think the notion that somehow we can be saved by central government moving this process down, we'll probably fail. We're going to see success coming from the grassroots up because ordinary citizens are ahead of politicians on climate change, and they know that their kids and their grandkids' future depends on it.
So I think that that picture of where the action is really reversed now, where people are seeing the cities, the states, the provinces.
And the communities.
The communities and companies all picking up part of the agenda. And the distributed generation piece of it is a very interesting evolution.
It's fascinating. And from the economic standpoint, you know, Vermont has saved $400 million in transmission costs in the last 4 years because we've moved to distributed power.
And it addresses the resiliency problem that you started out speaking about in terms of the storm response that you face and may face even more intensively as climate change risks pick up and more windstorms hit.
Right. Now, and it's not all beautiful. We still got huge challenges. And Philippe Couillard and I are together on this one, but we're doing great in Vermont and frankly Quebec too on moving electric generation to a more efficient process. In Vermont, we're doing terribly on transportation, which is about 46% of our climate change. Small rural state, you got to drive there to get there, and we're not moving to EVs fast enough.
So that is another challenge. In fact, Premier, this brings up the point that I wanted to then ask you about. Having just come out of 3 years in government, I tell people that the single thing I learned after 3 years of sitting in government is that change is really hard, no matter if the existing way of doing business is terribly broken and dysfunctional. So how are you getting people to come along with the change that you're putting forward, which is ambitious and important, but does mean people are going to have to do some things differently?
Well, change is a magical word in politics. Everybody wants change, but not that change, or change for that person, not for me. That's a constant in politics. So it comes down to what? It comes down to leadership. Political leadership still has an importance, and Governor Shumlin is a good example of that in New England. Leadership means you can show people what the destination is and why you need to get there, even if it's difficult. So I see so much advantages for our society to move in that direction sooner than later. But I think most people in Quebec are in agreement with this, although they see the difficulties, but they also see the opportunities of positioning our Quebec as one of the leaders in the world, even if we're a subnational state or a province. I think we are uniquely positioned with the tools we have to play a leadership role. And Governor Shumlin and myself are actually working together by linking our respective carbon markets, for example, having collaboration, learning about each other's experience.
So do you think, and this is really a closing question for each of you, do you think there are lessons from your experience that could translate onto the broader stage? You know, we think of Washington as broken, but frankly, the federal government in Canada is not particularly showing great leadership on the issue of climate change. So the question first for Governor and then for the Premier, is there something that we can take home from the Vermont experience that might help us unstick things in Washington?
I think that as long as we have the Congress that we have, we should take the examples of the states, of communities, of mayors, of premiers, and run with it. And you know, the march yesterday is an example. I mean, we got some things going for us. Listen, you cannot convince my daughter's generation, college age, that this isn't the central issue that they're facing. You can't convince anyone under 40 that this isn't true and it's not happening. So we have a huge grassroots group of folks who understand that their kids' future depends upon the actions we take now. If you combine that with the innovation and the technology that's moving very quickly in my view, and when I see what's happened just in the 4 years that I've been governor, we didn't have electric-driven heat pumps in our equation just a few years ago. Now we can cheaply put them in a home in Vermont and get folks off of oil-driven furnaces. And the examples go on and on. Storage is making great progress. So I think the answer, Dan, is this. We should stop the despair of what we can't change, which is federal governments, Congress in the United States, and I know the Premier's got his challenge at the federal level too, and instead use this conference, this energy, to say, how do we partner at the community level to demand that change happens because we're going to be a part of it? And we just got to dive in and do it. And I think together, the hope for the planet actually lies in the grassroots, in communities, in companies, in state governments, in mayors, in premiers, and if we sit around and wait for the world leaders to figure this one out, it will be 90 degrees every day in Vermont. We won't have maple trees, we won't have maple syrup, we won't bring in 4 million skiers every year to ski on white snow. We will all be cooked.
But the St. Lawrence Seaway will be a beautiful place for tropical vacations,
yeah,
benefiting
absolutely.
both Quebec and Vermont.
Coconuts.
The coconuts will be there. The pina coladas, I can see it now. The St. Lawrence Riviera. Premier, we have just a few seconds left, but can you tell us, what do you think is the potential for the Quebec experience having broader influence?
Well, I see two lessons from my recent experience and our experience in Quebec. First is that decentralized countries, federations in general, work well for this type of issue. We had a federal provincial conference last summer during which both Ontario and Quebec aligned themselves and really convinced our colleagues of all provinces in Canada that climate change and carbon pricing had to be part of a national energy strategy for Canada. The other lesson is for politics as a whole. I mean, you've got to take a stand. I'm convinced that people, even if it's difficult, will respect, ultimately reward a politician or a decision maker that tells them, look, I believe in this. Because I believe in this, this is what I want to do, and I'll tell you why, but I'm going to do it. You may agree, not agree, but I do believe that this is important for our society. Therefore, I take a stand and I take action. And I think our level of government is much better tool to do this than huge political structures at the supra-provincial or supra-state level.
Well, we're starting to develop a consensus that there is a need to focus on where the action is happening, and that's certainly at the state level and the provincial level. And our next pair of speakers will help us carry that story to the city level. So thank you, Premier. Thank you, Governor.
Dan. Give it up to Dan.
Good. So I'd like to now shift gears to the city scale, and we have two distinguished guests to help carry this conversation forward. First, Mayor Eduardo Paes of the city of Rio de Janeiro, and then as well, the Lord Mayor Frank Jensen, city of Copenhagen. Thank you.
Where do I sit?
Thank you. That's right there.
You take them, dude?
Oops, sorry. So mayors, thank you both for being here. I think a theme has begun to emerge, one that I know you both share, which is that the action on climate change has to be led by those who are in a position to take action. And it looks increasingly like that in many countries is at the city scale, at the state or provincial scale. So Mayor, perhaps I can begin with you. Rio is a huge city with all of the problems that big cities face, and yet you have made climate change a priority. You have begun to take action. Tell us a little bit about what you've been able to do.
Well, first, I'm afraid there's going to be a coup, tomorrow at the UN. I mean, local governments are going to take place of national governments, which is good.
And by the way, if any of you...
I think the march yesterday was asking for this coup, but I mean, again, when we go to the local level, I mean, it doesn't matter if it's regional or the city level. I mean, we're very connected to people. We're very connected to the everyday life of the people, and we can really take action. I mean, I can speak here on behalf of C40. I mean, I could say some examples of Rio, like the BRT lines. I mean, we're not a rich country. Rio's not a rich city. We're talking about a 6.5 million people city with the metropolitan area of 12 million people. So with a lot of challenges ahead of us. And like we're doing BRT lines, we're doing 150 kilometers of BRT lines. So we're taking out of the streets almost 3,000 buses, making transportation much better. So this is a concrete action that we do. We have lots of work concerning resiliency. We build an operation centers so we can deal with the climate change effects. And Rio is well known for its big tropical rains and mudslides, and people die every summer with mudslides, and this is getting much better. So C40, what we built in C40 was a bunch of networks. They're led by many cities. Copenhagen and Oslo and Mexico City and Buenos Aires and Johannesburg. And what we try to do is copy each other. I mean, there's no creativity, but to copy each other. Because we know that Copenhagen is very different from Rio, but there are lots of solutions that are brought by the mayor of Copenhagen that can be used in the city of Rio. So at the local level, we can measure, we can follow up, we can be tough on the local authorities to get things done. So there's lots of good examples in the local level, as we heard from the governors and the Prime Minister here.
Mayor Jensen, perhaps you can tell us some of the things you have been doing. What are those innovations you're bringing to the fore? And I think Mayor Paes' point is a good one, which is we don't need to start afresh in every city. Kind of learning best practices and spreading them out is a very good way to move forward quickly.
Yes, that's how we see it. That's mayors have to lead the way. And we want to use our solutions from Copenhagen and sharing with our colleagues in C40 cities and around the globe. We have a long tradition in Copenhagen. For mayors, for all mayors, we're focusing on livability for our citizens. It's what it's all about, to create livable cities for the citizens. And back in the 80s, in my city, Copenhagen, we have to clean our water in our harbor. We were cleaning the wastewater and we were separating the rainwater and the wastewater before we put it into the harbor. And today we can see the result. You can have a bath, you can swim in our inner harbor. We have harbor bath, we have beaches just outside Copenhagen. So people can see the result for the investment we have done in our severe system and in our wastewater system. And they can use it for the children after school. They can go and have a swim in the harbor. And after that, we were starting the process because we could see that we would have a lot of congestion in our city, like in other cities in the world, if we are not changing the way we were doing our transportation. And today we have 350 kilometers of separated bicycle lanes in Copenhagen, and a third of all trips in my city is done by bike. Half of the transportation for the citizens of Copenhagen are done by bike. Children learn to go by bike to school by their parents when they start school, and they continue biking. And today you can see all kinds of people are biking in Copenhagen, business people, ministers, mayors, all kinds of people are going by bike. And the next step in the 80s was also to transform the way we are heating our buildings. Today, 98% of all houses in Copenhagen are linked to our very efficient district heating system. And that's why we in Copenhagen from 1995 until 2012 have reduced our CO2 emissions with 40%. And we use that result also to show to our colleagues that you can have very good technologies in your city today. You can combine different kinds of technologies and make it into a solution. And there was a way when we was introduced to the city where Eduardo is our chairman in C40. We made this catalog from Copenhagen Solutions for Sustainable Cities. And we show what works and what doesn't in Copenhagen. And then you can transform some of the result in another condition to your own city. Because when you meet with businessmen and the business and industry, they very often talk about a technology. What we can do as cities, we can combine different technologies into a solution, and that's what city decision makers and politicians are focusing on. They're focusing on a concrete solution, and they're focusing on the benefit of it. Concrete, so the citizens, will it give better livability, and what is the concrete business case out of it? And that is the next step for Copenhagen, to show that it is a very good economy going green. It's not only today a possibility, it's a must, but there is also very good benefit of it economically.
Mayor, let me ask you to respond in some ways to what the mayor of Copenhagen has just said. Some critics would say, oh, it's easy for Copenhagen, very rich country, they can afford to do this, but Brazil is a different story, and Rio is a challenging place. You have many problems to deal with. How can you afford to take on the vision of sustainability or the attention to climate change that Copenhagen can do?
I mean, it's much more expensive not to deal with it. The benefits of dealing with climate change, the benefits of dealing with changing the culture of people, the benefits of implementing policies that deals with climate change, they're much more cheaper than when you don't deal with that. Obviously, you have to adapt the situations, as Mayor Jensen said. I mean, obviously the reality of Copenhagen is completely different from the reality of Rio. But lots of the solutions, I mean, Copenhagen was, let's use an example here. We talk about bike transportation. I mean, mobility using bikes. Copenhagen has been doing that since the beginning of the 80s. Rio is the biggest bike lanes, has the biggest bike lanes network in Latin America. It's almost 450 kilometers. And people would say, okay, this is too hot in Rio, especially in summertime. And that's not because you only have the global warming, it's always been like that. I hope Vermont doesn't get like Rio, because if it does, I don't know what's going to happen to us. But you can use bike lanes to move around city. So there's lots of interesting solutions, even in cities like Rio, even in cities in developing countries with huge challenges. I mean, obviously we are in different levels of civilization, of development, but most of the solutions that are found in Copenhagen can be used in Rio, and vice versa. I mean, there's lots of ways to get things done. C40, the interesting about C40 is that network of cities changing and solutions with each other. This is something that's been very helpful. And having clear targets, having measurement, establishing goals. This is something that when we look at the national levels, I mean, it's just, you look at the targets, when they establish targets, they don't compromise with these targets. It's difficult to follow these targets. I mean, this is something easy to follow in the city or the regional level. You can follow the targets of Copenhagen. Obviously, they have much higher targets than ours, and you can follow the targets in Rio.
So Mayor Jensen, you have done a dramatic amount of investment to change the city, to make it a more livable city, to improve sustainability, to address climate change. Isn't that expensive, though? I mean, even Copenhagen has to worry about competitiveness at some level. Aren't you worried that new economic development is going to go to someplace cheaper to set up shop?
We set up in 2009 a very proactive climate plan, and we set the target to become the first carbon neutral capital city in 2025. And we are on the right target. We have a step-by-step plan to become carbon neutral in 2025, and we have also now adopted a climate adoption plan to protect the city against the climate change we can see, because we have also these very heavy rainbursts over Copenhagen, and it costs a lot of money. We have in July 2011 one cloudburst who was damaging a lot of the city, flooding the city, and it cost more than $1 billion US for the insurance companies and for the city. So you can see we have to invest to protect the city against the changing climate, and we have also to find new solutions to protect us against the coming climate change. And we can see that the investments we are doing, and to be one of the early starters in that process to change and transform your city to be more green, is a very beneficial investments. I think it's in May this year, London School of Economics made a report from Copenhagen showing that in Copenhagen, the investments in green solution and job creation and the good economy goes hand in hand. And that's what we are going to tell to our colleagues at national level, at government level, that there is very good payoff to make the right investments. And today, as you mentioned, Dan, we know what works and what doesn't. We don't have to develop the same solution in all cities. We can just learn from each other, and we can share our solutions that give the best results in the local condition, in your city, in your country.
Can I make a comment on that?
Please.
I mean, there's this issue about, first, as the governor said, I mean, there's people national governments, they don't realize that. I mean, I hope they realize tomorrow, but I'm not very hopeful. But people, businessmen, people in the everyday, ordinary people in their everyday life, in their communities, they've already started to realize that. I mean, we saw that in the march here in New York yesterday. I mean, it's so good to have a march in another city that's not yours. I didn't go to the march. Next time I'll be there protesting against something. But anyway, there's also the thing about the brand of the city. I mean, the decision of investing in a city like Copenhagen, or even in a city like Rio, I mean, the environment in Rio, the nature in Rio, which is a very rich nature, it's an economic asset. I mean, it cannot be seen as a problem. People decide to live in Rio because of its environmental qualities. Businessmen decide to invest in the city of Rio, and the same happens to Copenhagen, because of its environmental assets. So it's never a problem. I mean, and it costs much more, as I said. I mean, if you have a big flood during summertime, and you really, when it happens in Rio, stops the city. People loses everything because of the floods, because of the mudslides, and this is much more expensive.
So Mayor, let me push you on this. You said maybe it's time for a revolution where the cities and states take over the conversation that's meant to be done at the national government. Tomorrow. Well, there's a very interesting opinion piece in today's New York Times that says the same thing and says, why not make the treaty or the agreement that we negotiate over the next 14 months, aiming for a conclusion in Paris in December of 2015, open to mayors and cities, governors and states to sign alongside national governments?
Let me give you some numbers. I mean, we are defending that we should have in the SDG Sustainable Development Goals, Urban Sustainable Development Goal. I mean, with the mayors together from C40 and many other cities have signed a letter to the Secretary General asking for that. Tomorrow we're going to announce a compact of mayors with clear, in 2012 in Rio, when we had Rio Plus 20, C40 mayors, we put clear targets, and there's something. I mean, the gap between what's needed on emissions and what national governments are doing, what cities are doing, represents 20% of this gap. So cities and regional levels, they should be considered. And when I say it should be considered, it's not just a matter of, okay, make national government lives easier. I don't want to do that. But when I say that, it's because this could give us, for the everyday life of the mayors, ways of financing what we're doing to reduce emissions.
It'll also show the public that there's action happening. And it does seem that the mayors and the premiers and governors have the action on the ground in a way that is tangible and people can connect to it. Mayor, what do you think? Should we open up our climate change agreement to a broader set of leaders?
Copenhagen was hosting the COP in 2009, the COP 15, and my predecessor invited 79 mayors to come to Copenhagen when the COP took place, and they didn't make an international agreement. Sorry, they didn't when they had the COP in Copenhagen, but the 79 mayors made a mayor agreement to go home and just go on and lead the way, and that's what we have done since 2009 in C40. I think that the C40 is a very good example on how decision makers on city level and mayors can join and get the inspiration to continue to lead the way. And we're working on a triple helix background in my city, where we invite the business and industry in the clean tech sector, both in Denmark but also from abroad, and research fellows at universities to secure that when we are investing in the next solution in Copenhagen, it will not just be the best practice on the level we are today, but next practice. So we can continue innovating the green solutions for cities. And you can see that creates a lot of new jobs when we're doing that. And that's what we are suffering after the financial crisis, that we'll have creating a lot of new jobs to all the young people who are graduate at our schools and universities. So it goes hand in hand to make the right investments and make it done.
Mayors, we're unfortunately very near the end of our time. The last time I was in Rio de Janeiro was for the 1992 Earth Summit, at which time I was a negotiator of climate change for the United States, and I had just been part of the team that had brought an agreement into place. And I thought the issue was pretty much done.
Yeah.
It's been a disappointing intervening 22 years, but I am more optimistic today, having heard from you and from the governor and the premier, than I have been in most of those 2 decades. So congratulations on all you're doing, and good luck tomorrow helping to shift the dialogue towards this decentralized, bottom-up approach to action on climate change.
Thank you.